The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they are told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident.
You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast that chronicles the journey, the challenges, and the struggles surrounding the life of Aviator Tony, a career airline pilot currently flying for a legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 11 of Squawk Ident, recorded on the 27th of December, 2019, from Studio 1025 on the 10th floor of the Renaissance Hotel in Fort Worth, Texas. On this episode of Squawk Ident, we're going to bring to you From the Flight Line, a 5-day trip I took a week ago with layovers in Cancun, Las Vegas, and on the island of Maui. We'll also talk about the running I was able to perform on Maui and how I pushed through the barrier of getting out there when you just don't feel like strapping on some running shoes. And from there we're going to discuss stories of pilots and flight crews behaving badly while on the job. All this and more on this episode of Squawk Ident. But before we dive into it, a quick word from our sponsors. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Well, before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment and again thank Dom Z from the Breaker podcast for coming into the studio for episode 10. We had a great time hanging out and playing with all the new gadgets that I've acquired over the past few weeks. And unfortunately, that past episode was cut a little bit short because of some technical difficulties. But, you live and learn. So on this episode, I thought I'd kind of catch up since we didn't talk about the flight line stories and the usual segments that I try to cover throughout the Squawk Ident podcast every week. So let's start it up with From the Flight Line. Well, my schedule over the past few weeks has been pretty good. Let's start out with the 15th. I had about 7 days off in a row, which is not typical, but it does happen in the schedule. The reason I had so many days off in a row was because I kind of backloaded the month, meaning that I had a heavy schedule towards the end of the month. The first few weeks were very light in my schedule, but the last 2 weeks are very heavy. So, and I'm actually in that second part right now with the last 2 weeks of the month being kind of heavy. So let's back up to the 15th of November. I started a 5-day trip. It's actually a 4-day trip, but it spilled onto the 5th day because of the red eye that the trip ended with. But it started out with an LA to DFW, Dallas, Fort Worth, and that was on Friday the 15th. From there, we had about an hour and a half sit and then off to Cancun. Now, I've been to Cancun a few times, and it's always kind of a nice trip, especially this time of year when it's getting a little colder outside and you get to go down to Cancun and stay in that tropical weather. And unfortunately, it was a very short overnight. For those of you that follow on social media, you can see some of the photos that I posted there on that overnight, that layover. And it was really, we got in, was it 11 o'clock at night by the time we got to the hotel, 11:30. So, off to bed because, it's a long day of flying and you're tired. And in the morning, I had just enough time to get up, have some breakfast, and go back to the room and get ready and repack and get ready to go. So that trip was relatively short for that overnight, but then it was off to Charlotte, where we swapped aircraft, a couple hours there, just enough time to grab a quick bite, and then off to Las Vegas. Now, Vegas overnight, you're thinking, wow, cool. Did you go to the Strip, and did you go to the casino? No, none of that happened. So we get in at 8 o'clock at night. It was a relatively long day. So it's Cancun, Charlotte to Vegas. And just enough time to get to the hotel. And by the time we got to the hotel, which, by the way, is nowhere near the Strip, there's nothing there. There's nothing around, and not even a place at the hotel to grab a quick bite or a quick beer or something if you have the time. And in this case, we didn't. Everything was shut down, and that's it. So off to bed. And that's where we kind of caught up on the sleep a little bit. We had a little bit longer overnight there, but not by much, just about 14 hours. And then off to Los Angeles, where we had a good sit, swapped airplanes, and headed out to Maui. And it was a relatively uneventful trip. The weather was decent all the way in. A little bit of thunderstorm buildup in Maui. We actually had to divert around some cells and got a bump or two on the descent. But by the time we were getting close enough to the airport, we ended up having to perform an ILS. That's an instrument landing system type of approach, where you're looking at the instruments inside the cockpit, not looking outside at an airport, and which we do even if it's visual conditions. We still always monitor the instruments inside the cockpit on the arrival and on the approach. And this situation, it was down not quite to minimums, about 1,000-foot overcast layer and moderate rain. Maui's a relatively short runway, so it's kind of a maximum effort to get the airplane on the ground and stopped safely before the turnoff. And everything went okay. It was actually my landing. It was a pretty good landing. I was pretty proud of it, especially being with the conditions what they were, a little windy, a little wet. And, you have to use the wipers on the aircraft. Yes, we do have rain wipers or precipitation type wipers on the screens of the airplane. We used those, and we landed, turned off the runway, parked at the gate. And of course, it's tropical, 80 degrees and a little bit of rain, pretty humid. It was really nice. So off to the hotel, and there we had a nice 30-hour overnight. And we'll talk a little bit about that overnight a little bit later in the show. So this is it. This was the trip after a full day in Maui, enough to get even 3 meals in before we had to head back to the airport. Now, that red-eye flight back to Los Angeles was a relatively uneventful flight. I had plenty of rest the night before, so it was not too much of a big deal. Pretty good conversations had in the cockpit. We got some crew meals handed to us midway over the Pacific. And, you really can't ask for much more. I landed in Los Angeles around 4:30 in the morning. Relatively early. It was still dark. And by the time I got to my vehicle in the employee lot, the sun was coming up, and it did help a little bit with that drive home. So yeah, that was my 5-day trip. I then had a couple days off, and then came back to the airport to do a 2-day trip. And the 2-day trip was a Charlotte overnight and 1 leg back. So 1 leg out to Charlotte, 1 leg back. And something really interesting happened on the way to Charlotte. And, these things, it's kind of weird how they happen. Here we are on episode 10, sitting there with a friend of mine, Dom Z, in the studio talking about the strange and unusual things what Breaker, his podcast, is all about. And so here we were talking about strange things, hauntings, and, strange sightings and whatnot. Just, had a great time talking about it. And on the radio, we're hearing aircraft talk about these lights that are above them. ahead of them. And they were asking ATC, hey, what are these airplanes circling above? It looks like 4 or 5 airplanes circling above. What's going on there? They're thinking the military exercise, that they're doing some kind of holds at high altitude. And hey, air traffic controller that didn't know anything about it, didn't have anything on their scope. And I found it interesting enough that I marked the time and went on liveatc.net and looked at the archives for that frequency at that time, and I was able to find it. And I want to play a little bit of it for you now.
Hey, Senator, American 2825, question.
American 2825, go ahead.
Yeah, just looking out in front of us, it looks like, can't tell the distance, but looks like a whole bunch of aircraft circling, maybe 50 miles, 60 miles ahead of us, above us.
American 2825, I don't know anything about that. Let me see if I can see something.
Thank you, just interesting watching them keep doing circles.
2825, yeah, I don't see anybody circling out in front of you at any altitude. There's a couple targets coming off of Memphis, but they're very low altitude.
Interesting.
I think United 1554 has an also.
2825, where are you seeing us?
Dead ahead, maybe just east of Memphis, and it looks like they're above us, so I could guess maybe 400. I'm not sure though.
American 2825, roger. And are you seeing this physically or just on the TCAS?
And negative on the TCAS, yeah, we're looking at it, and we keep seeing their lights coming towards our direction, and then you can see them turning away. It's interesting.
American 2825, roger. American 2825 for weather, deviations, right of course are approved, label for direct jack.
Say again the fix?
Juliet Kilo Sierra, Austria, November.
American 2825, when able, right deviation.
Memphis, circling.
Oh yeah, we got him. He's up there too. Looks like multiple targets.
Minimum 3, possibly 4 or 5.
In United 1701, we see them also. We've seen about 10 of them.
27, I also got your report, and United 1554, I got your report of the unidentified aircraft. Who else saw it?
United 1701, we see them also.
1701, where did you see it exactly?
They're 12 o'clock, just off our nose, but off in the distance. Moving right to left, kind of south towards north or eastward. And will disappear kind of as they go lower, and then we hear them starting up higher on the same track. Probably see 15 lights so.
350.
Delta 825, that's Roger. United 1101, Roger, thank you for that report. Contact Indy Center 127.02.
27.02, United 1701.
Delta 2927, contact Memphis Center 127.37. They'll have deviations if needed.
All right, 2737, good day, Delta 2927. I haven't seen him in the last minute or two.
Roger.
So that was the recording that I was able to pull off liveatc.net. And I was able to pull out a lot of the dead air that actually happens in between the talking there. But as you can see from the conversation that the aircraft were having with ATC, that there was definitely some lights of some kind going on, and they were querying, what's going on? Do you see them? And there's obviously an explanation. It was probably either a military aircraft or something that had multiple lights on it. Who knows? It could have been a drone, right? So we're never going to know. But, interesting things happen while we're on the flight line. And these kind of things, I'm sure, can be explained. But when you don't know what's going on, it's kind of freaky to see that while you're flying along. Now, I found that really interesting. I was thinking, what are the odds, right? You don't see anything for months, if not years, and then all of a sudden you hear all this chatter on the radio right after you do an episode in relation to the strange and unusual things you hear. So I just thought that was pretty cool, and I'm glad I got to share it with you. Another interesting thing that happened that I wanted to just share was something that has to do with something that we call CRM or TEM. Now, pilots, aviation, we have countless number of acronyms for everything, and you can't even get them straight. And there's actually some very comical videos on YouTube that kind of make fun of the fact that pilots just juggle these acronyms around like they're second nature. So what is CRM? CRM is Crew Resource Management. This is a term that was developed I think it was around the early 90s, and it was a way to prevent this kind of totalitarian, captain rules everything. You got to do what I say or else, even if it's wrong or dangerous or unsafe. And of course, there were some incidences, and this caused the FAA to kind of look into a way to make sure that we have a more balanced cockpit or flight line. Now, I kind of dug into it, and Legacy Airline defines CRM as the effective use of all resources, humanware, hardware, and software to achieve safe, efficient flight operations. Now, CRM was the, I think, first generation of this term to have a good communicating crew to promote efficiency and safety on the flight line. Other industries have developed this over the years, primarily in the medical field. Physicians now use these terms regularly, like CRM and checklists and whatnot. Well, in the past few years, the FAA has now defined a new term, and the acronym for this is TEM. And what it is defined as, according again to Legacy Airlines, is threat and error management. And it's a method as managing or mitigating the effects of threats and errors before they become consequential. And it is the goal of threat and error management as a first step in understanding TEM is defining threats, the crew factors, the errors, and understanding aircraft states. So it's a way to trap errors before they become a problem. You may have heard this referred to as the Swiss cheese model. And if you can imagine layers of Swiss cheese, you have threats that are coming at you constantly. And in the first layer, most of them are being trapped, but a few get through those little holes and they get to the next layer. And then more trapped, but then a few get through those holes, and so on and so forth. And hopefully by the end of the row, as is depicted in most of the graphs that we have around our schoolhouse, you're trying to do your best to trap these errors and manage them before they get out of hand. So these are some definitions of threat and error management and CRM. My first lesson that I had for CRM, I was actually an instrument-rated pilot, learning how to fly. I had changed my career to become a pilot, and I was going through some rigorous training. And part of that training involved a ground school class that was taught by, at the time, a furloughed Masaba pilot who had come to the flight school to do some ground training in order to generate a little bit of income, stay in the aviation world while he waited for that recall. And as we discussed in some previous episodes, we know what furlough is when a company downsizes and they lay off a pilot for a period of time. So he explained some stories from the flight line, and I found it very interesting. And one of the stories that he told is a story that stuck with me to this day. And that was a story that he explained when he was an FO. He was flying an Avro jet. It's a 4-jet engine high-wing aircraft that he comically referred to as having 5 APUs, auxiliary power units. APUs are there to generate power. They're turbine engines generating electricity for the aircraft. They don't produce any thrust. So it's quite, a funny anecdote that an Avro aircraft is a high-wing aircraft that has very small engines, so therefore it has 5 APUs instead of 4 engines and an APU. So anyway, he explains that he was flying along, and this was back in the age when Palm Pilots were a big deal. They were new. People could use this electronic calendar option that they had on it. Palm Pilots were becoming more and more popular for business executives and for frequent flyers. So the scenario was they were at cruise altitude, and the first officer, the instructor that was teaching the class, was explaining how he had just downloaded this electronic flight log. So as pilots, we have to always log our flights as a record to keep. Truck drivers do the same. They keep track of their rest and how much driving time, and we as pilots are recommended that we record what our flight time is and the conditions and whatnot. And it's very important also when you're trying to get a job. They ask you, what kind of flight time do you have? And they get pretty specific and usually want to see flight logs for the interview. So in this scenario, the first officer was on his Palm Pilot putting in his electronic flight log totals in, and they got a call from the back of the airplane, from the cabin. And it was their number one flight attendant. It was an older lady who was complaining that a passenger was using their phone, and she had told the passenger to put it away, and both looked at each other like, well, what phone works at 37,000 feet, whatever they were at? That doesn't make any sense. But they're like, well, what do you mean he's on his phone? She says, well, he's typing away on his phone. He's got one of those fancy new phones, and he won't turn it off. I've told him multiple times that phones need to be turned off for the flight, and he's not listening to me. And the FO was looking at his Palm Pilot, knowing exactly what was happening. This was probably a frequent flyer, a business person that was working. They were using their calendar. So he's like, oh, okay. And the captain says, okay, we'll take care of it. So the captain looks over at the first officer and says, okay, how do you think we should handle this? And the FO goes, well, obviously he's not on a phone. Phones don't work up here, He's probably using his Palm Pilot of some kind, or a BlackBerry, who knows? And, she just doesn't know what she's talking about. And the captain goes, okay, so what do you think we should do? And he goes, well, I don't know. I'm probably just, not going to inconvenience this guy. The captain goes, I'll take care of it. So he makes a PA, and he says, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, and unfortunately, for security purposes, we have to ask that all passengers turn off all electronic devices for the remainder of the flight. Now, in a post 9/11 era, and this was soon after 9/11, so it wasn't very far removed in everyone's minds, and everyone complied, and this passenger put away his phone. And the FO looks over at the captain and says, well, what'd you do that for? That guy's going to get pissed, And the captain goes, well, listen, we got to fly with her all month long. This is just the beginning of the month. It's just the first, few legs. And we're going to have to fly with her all month long. If we piss her off now, CRM goes out the window. If something happens in the back, she's not going to care, So this is what we're going to do. When we get to the overnight, we're going to offer to buy her dinner. We're going to take her to the local restaurant, and we're going to buy her dinner. I'll buy, he says. And what I want you to do during dinner is pull out your phone and explain to her that you can turn the phone mode off, and then you can use it as a calendar or as an organizer, as a logbook, as what you're doing now. And that way you can explain to her what's going on. That way she is not embarrassed now. She doesn't feel like she's ignored by us, which will create a bad crew resource management, a bad vibe. Puts up barriers of communication. And we don't want that. And she'll realize what we did, and then she'll be grateful because we were, backing up our crew, and so we inconvenienced the passenger for probably the remainder of the flight, which was about 30 minutes as he explained it. But with her, we're going to fly with her all month, and she's going to be appreciative of what we did, and we're going to have a good month together. So isn't that the better way to go? And he was like, wow, that's a good idea. So CRM is actually a very important thing, a very important part of what we do. It's not just flying airplanes and pushing buttons and landing. It also has to do with taking care of people, learning personalities, and being really a champion of your crew, so that team is very much a big part of it. And the reason it came to mind this past week, I should say, is because on one of my flights, I believe it was the Dallas to Cancun flight. It was the evening flight leaving Dallas-Fort Worth out of the international terminal. And I approached the gate, and I noticed that, my captain that I've been flying with earlier in the past few days was there pulling up paperwork and looking at weather as we normally do. And I also noticed a flight attendant. Now, normally we meet the flight attendants when we board the aircraft. They're usually on the aircraft already, but because it was an international flight, they had to do a security search and clean the aircraft and make sure it was catered and stocked up. So we usually don't go down to the aircraft till that's all completed. So we had about 15 minutes at the gate to chit-chat, and I approached one of our flight attendants who was sitting there and introduced myself, said hello, and asked about her week and how it was going and how she was doing, and basically tried to strike a conversation that would promote positive CRM. I didn't do this intentionally. I just did this naturally. And I ended up finding out in those 15 minutes a lot about a member of my crew that I had just met for the first time. And after chatting with her, and the gate agent said, okay, we're ready for you to board. So we went in and swiped in and did our thing and started walking down the jet bridge. And she says to me, I just have to say, thank you for being cool. And I just kind of stopped in my tracks and said, what? She goes, thank you for being cool. It's a rarity nowadays to have cool pilots like you guys that, take the time to say hello and to chit chat and to get to know me a little bit. I've been doing this for 25 years and, I've lived a pretty good life, but have my struggles. And it's just so much better to come to work and have pilots that, take the time. And I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean pilots don't normally talk to you and chit chat? And she said, well, she goes, it just depends. She goes, a lot of times, you guys just go in the cockpit and, get your checklist and your flows right away. You say hello and the captain gives a brief, and then that's it. That's the last we hear of you. We land, we say goodbye, nice flight, and so on. And I'm like, yeah, I guess we've become a society where we do our job and we kind of get in and we get out, and we don't really spend the time like we should. And that's partly because of us, and it's partly because of the company and efficiency and, how quick our turns are. We don't really fly all month long together like we used to back in the old days. And she's like, yeah, every leg it's a different crew, but you guys just spent just a few minutes, and you guys really made my day. Thank you. And, afterwards we got in the cockpit, and the captain and I talked a little bit about it, and he goes, yeah, that was nice for her to say. And it really sparked a good trip. It just made it all that much better. And that is the essence of what crew resource management is. So as I talked about earlier in the opener, the Maui overnight was a nice long overnight. I got in at a decent time, got to sleep in a little bit, but of course being at this time with the daylight savings, it's about a 2-hour time difference from Pacific time. So I woke up a lot earlier than I wanted to, and this is a very common thing with us when we go to Hawaii. I mean, you think, oh, you had a long day, long flight, long week, whatever. You're going to sleep in because you got a nice long overnight, but when the body clock says, hey, it's, 7 a.m. your time, I know it's only 5 a.m. Hawaii time, but I think you need to start getting up. You open an eye, and all of a sudden you hear the roosters. Oh, yeah, it's Hawaii. There's chickens and roosters everywhere. And they wake you up, and you think, well, I'm up, and I should probably go for a run. I haven't gone for a run in a while. I did post a few photos from a couple trips ago, and I did a nice long run, and I decided today I brought all my gear with me. There's no excuse. I've got to get out there. I got to stay healthy and fit, and, I occasionally like to have a relatively unhealthy meal, and the best way to combat the effects of that is to get my regular exercise. So I strapped on my shoes and I went out for a run. I only intended to run about 4 to 5 miles, which is a lot, but when you're a slow-paced distance runner like myself, it's just a nice, easy run, and you get to see a lot of the island that way. And it was a beautiful opportunity to get out there. It was a Sunday morning, and it was superb. I ended up running 8 miles. At the end of it, I was not tired. I was not sore. I took my time. I took walk breaks. I even stopped into an ABC store and grabbed a bottle of Gatorade and a snack. And the coolest part about that run is that if you map it out correctly from the layover hotel that we stay in Wailea, you can run southbound around the southern or the southwestern side of the island. And you can run to the Wailea Beach Park, where you can hit the sand, run along the beach, and it turns into the Wailea Beach Path, which is a walking path that goes between the shoreline and all the resorts. And you get to see all these beautiful resort hotels and all the amenities that they have and they're offering their guests. And it's open to the public because the beaches there are all public. And so you can run down there. It's about 3.5, 4 miles to the end. And then I usually head inland a little bit and run along the golf course back northbound and back towards Wailea and the city where the hotel is. So, running out there, getting out there, I didn't have to. I could have just easily just said, well, maybe I'll go to the gym later or something. But, getting out there in the morning, right as the sun's coming up, listening to the birds and the animals and the things that I don't normally get to witness on the mainland. It really is refreshing and great for the soul. Running has been a big passion of mine, and I love doing it, especially on overnights. And I feel better about myself later on when I am with the crew and having a good IPA and some chicken wings, and I'm really not too worried about it because I'm getting my fitness in and when I can, and I intend to be around for a long time. So I'm going to keep it up, and I hope you do too. So a couple people have asked me, what kind of gear do you bring? Do you have a GPS watch? What do you use to track all your stuff? And, at the beginning of my exploration of running, I, would have all the GPS watch and the headphones and all that stuff. And somewhere in, I think it was marathon training back in 2015 when I ran the Long Beach Marathon. And for that run, I went totally minimalist. I had nothing but a watch and my running shoes and clothes on. And it really changed the way I look at running. Before, I had to have my tunes on, I had to make sure I had, at the time, I think I was using Pandora, and I had to have my running watch and my sunglasses and my running hat, and everything had to be just right, you know? And then after that marathon, I realized, well, you know, one of these fit belts that can hold a couple gel packs, and, you know, the water bottle's not a big deal. You can just use one that you can toss and recycle. And the tunes were not as important as I thought they would be. And I started going without. But now I kind of have, when I'm not training for any particular event, I put on my running shoes. I like New Balance shoes. You know, Captain in Training, white New Balances. No, I'm kidding. I use a minimalist, like with a zero drop New Balance Foam Fresh, I think it's called, running shoes. And running shorts and a tank top, and I go for a run. I do wear a hat, try to keep the sun off my face. I do use a Garmin, I believe it's a Garmin running watch, a 430 maybe. I'm not quite sure the exact model. It's an older one. It's nothing fancy. And the only reason I carry that is so that I don't have to mess with my phone at all. I do bring a phone with me just in case I fall or hurt myself, or, you know, I get lost. I can use the map. And how do you keep a phone from flopping around, especially a big smartphone? So I use a fit belt. It's a neoprene belt that goes around your waist, and you can put your phone inside of it, and no zippers or anything. It doesn't flop around. It doesn't have an elastic band. It's just one continuous loop, and I love it. I've had that one actually since I ran the Huntington Beach event, and I swear by it. And if I don't have it, it bothers me. But that's it. Good pair of running glasses. And if I'm running for more than an hour, which is rare, then I make sure I bring a sport drink of some kind with me. So I encourage you to get out there and run. It's very important to stay fit, especially in this day and age. And if you enjoy a good IPA and some wings like I do from occasion, then it's great for the waistline as well. You guessed it, ladies and gentlemen, and now it's time for There We Were, when pilots and flight crew behave badly. Now, earlier we talked about always backing up your crew, but sometimes your crew member that is asking for you to back them up may not be in the right. As a matter of fact, they might just be doing something that's not correct, or misunderstood. I have a couple examples I'd like to talk about, and as the disclaimer at the beginning of the show indicates, these stories may or may not have happened to me, and may or may not have been modified over the years. So let's begin with the first one. I remember years ago sitting at the airport ready to go, and as we're boarding, the flight attendant poked her head into the cockpit and said, Captain, this guy's not listening to me. And the captain's like, what? He's like, he's not listening to me. I told him he needs to move, and he's not listening to me. So the captain got out of his seat and took one step into the galley, and there was a passenger in the very first row of 1A, dressed in a nice suit. Clearly, this person was a frequent flyer. And captain goes, Captain, she wants me to move. I don't want to move. And the captain goes, okay, well, what seems to be the issue? He goes, I don't know why. She just wants me to move. I don't want to move. This is the seat I paid for. This is the seat I want. So the captain goes, well, can I see your boarding card, please? And he's like, sure. So he looks at it. There's his name. It says he's a frequent flyer on it, and one of the top tier frequent flyers at that. And he says, well, this is the seat you paid. I think you're good. And he looked at the flight attendant like, is there, what's going on? She said, you should always back up your crew. I wanted him to move to 3B and C. He could have the whole row to himself. And what was really going on was that particular seat faced the flight attendant jump seat. And she didn't want this guy in her face. She wanted some space. So she wanted him to move because it was not a full flight and there were plenty of seats, and she wanted him to move back a few rows into an aisle where he could have two seats together and no one was next to him. And he didn't want to move. So she came unglued. You should always back up your crew, and I don't know if I want to fly with you. And it was ugly. It was just an ugly scenario. And the captain says, well, if you don't feel comfortable performing your duties or you have a problem with me, I'll be more than happy to make a phone call and see about having you replaced. But that's up to you because, at the end of the day, we need to go do our jobs and do our thing. And she kind of, huffed and puffed a little bit, and she calmed down, and we continued our flying together. And at the end of the day, she was complaining out loud to us that we were in this crew van together going to the hotel. And she was saying, crew scheduling, they're not letting me drop my trip on the last day. And I told them I can't do that last turn. And they told me I had to do it, and because they didn't have anybody else to do it. And I just, this is crap. And, I should be able to drop that trip. And we're like, okay, yeah, good luck with that. Hopefully they'll be able to accommodate you. But, if you got to do it, you got to do it, right? These things happen. So, we went on the next day, and of course it was one leg back to base and then this last turn of the trip. So we take off out of O'Hare, and as soon as we rotated the aircraft, as we're lifting off, we hear a dunk, boom, and we're like, oh, what was that noise? And the captain knew exactly what had happened. He goes, oh, she fell. I'm like, she fell? She shouldn't be up. I mean, okay, just let me fly the plane. So I flew the plane, got up to altitude, the autopilot on, and now we had a moment. And as soon as we had a chance, within a minute or so, he calls back and says, are you okay? And she says, well, I fell. I fell and I hurt my arm. It's like, what do you mean you hurt your arm? Are you okay to continue, or do we need to go back? How did you hurt your arm? She's like, well, I fell. It was slippery and I fell, and I hurt my arm, hit the armrest, and I hurt it. And he was like, well, should we turn back? And, how hurt are you? What does hurt mean? She was like, no, I can continue to Chicago. I can do my duties. That's fine. But, when we get to Chicago, I'm going to have to go to see the medical office to get removed from this flying because I don't think I can go on. And we both looked at each other like, are you the same person that was complaining about doing this last flight just earlier, a day ago? Okay. Whatever you need, if you need anything from us, let us know and we'll continue. And it was like a pretty short flight. I don't remember exactly where it was from and to, but 30 minutes later, we're on the ground, and, she goes off the plane. She's like, all right, it's bye. And she's gone. We didn't see her anymore ever again. She got out of that last turn. She hurt her arm. And, this is bad. This is bad because, maybe she legitimately fell. I hope that was the case, and it wasn't an intentional fall, because that would just be stupid. And fraud, not to mention fraud. But she fell and she got off that last leg. So, okay, let's just chalk that one up to bad behavior. But it doesn't just stop there. I've had a couple other instances that I will gladly dive into. And I heard a story, and firsthand from an individual that had dealt with this. Now, there was a new hire that was on airport ready, which from previous episodes, if you've heard, airport ready is something that a lot of regional airlines have in their schedule for pilots, which means the low man on the totem pole or the low woman on the totem pole would have to sit at the airport for a period of time, usually about 6 to 8 hours, something like that. And you're sitting in the crew room or somewhere on airport property, and in case there is a misconnect or a sick call or something, and they need a pilot to go fly something, that pilot is on call. Not just on call at home, but on call at the airport. And this young individual, new to the company, relatively young gentleman in his mid-20s, was at the airport and didn't get called on the first day. On the second day, he was assigned again on call. He was the junior man on the totem pole for that day as well. And he came to the airport and he had a problem signing into the computer, which is how we would sign in for the trip. So that's how they knew you were there. You signed in on one of the company computers and they knew you were at the airport. So he decides to call them and says, hey, I had a problem signing in. Can you sign me in from there from scheduling? And like, yeah, it's fine. Here's the 800 number, call the IT department. They can help you out and reset your password or whatever. He goes, oh, okay. So about halfway through the day, he's looking at the schedule, he's looking at the weather, he realizes, they're not going to call me. There's nothing available. Okay. So what does he do? He leaves early. He goes to his crash pad or whatever he goes. On the third day, he again was assigned on call. And this time he called from his crash pad and said, I can't sign in again. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here with my password, but it locked me out. Can you just sign me in? And they're like, yeah, okay, fine. But I think on the third day, the crew scheduling was like, yeah, this smells funny. So about an hour later, they call him back and are like, okay, we have a flight for you. It's leaving out of gate, G9. Can you head out that way? It's they're waiting for you. It's past departure. And he goes, oh, G9. Okay, I could be there in like 30 minutes. And like 30 minutes? Aren't you at the airport? He's like, well, I was at the airport and then I wasn't feeling too good, so I had to use the bathroom and then it really, I left the airport. I went to the crash pad, used the bathroom there. So I could come back, but it's going to be at least 30 minutes for me to hop back on a bus and get back there. And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's not going to work for us. Here's a missed assignment. Contact your chief pilot. So the chief pilot gets notified and the union rep gets notified. And what ends up happening is this individual has to come into the chief pilot's office while on probation, mind you, and has to explain himself. And he goes, well, what happened was, I got to the airport and the first day they didn't call me. I got to the airport the second day, they didn't call me. I had a problem signing in. Third day, I really felt bad and I must have had some food poisoning and I knew it wasn't going to be good and I didn't want to call in sick because I'm brand new. I don't want to get in trouble. So I knew they weren't going to use me. So I just went home and to the crash pad and they called me as soon as I walked in the door and I just was in a bad spot. And of course they're like, well, is this the story you're going to stick with? Really? Is this the truth? And, the union was involved and they're like, well, this is the story he told me and this is the story that he told you and this is the story he's telling through scheduling. So we, should believe him. So I think he got a slap on the wrist. I wasn't there, in the room, but it definitely was a bad choice. And these kind of things happen. People make mistakes. This individual is, I'm sure, back on the line, flying. I don't even know him personally, but this story has its merit, and I did get it from a good source. So these kind of bad behaviors, definitely, it's a matter of time, man. It's just a matter of time. Just be honest and don't try to pull a fast one on the company, because there's been many pilots that have come before you that have tried to pull faster ones than that. But it's not just FOs either. I'm gonna say about 15 years ago, I am flying the line with a really cool guy, a really nice captain, and he's a southern boy from Raleigh, and he and I laughed so hard flying together. He would tell the funniest jokes. We got along very well, and he had this southern accent and really could find a way to just tell a really good joke. And on one of our layovers, we get to the layover. It's late at night. It's an outstation, meaning it's not a base or a big airport. It's a small airport somewhere. And we have to shut down the aircraft for the night and secure it. And my job at the time, as a first officer at that time, was to conclude a pre-flight or a post-flight with a good flashlight, go around, make sure that the airplane doesn't have any leaks or didn't hit a bird or any damage. Tires look good. Landing gear looks good. Everything, all latches secured. But it's a relatively brief post-flight. So I come back in and I put away all my stuff and I'm on the jet bridge with the flight attendant waiting to walk up the jet bridge and, head to the curb and go to the hotel. And my captain was still in the cockpit. I'm like, oh, what's he doing in there? Do you know? And the flight attendant says, I don't know. He's been in there a while. I'm like, okay, maybe he found something wrong with the airplane and he's writing it up. Let me go check on him. So I walk back onto the aircraft. And the cockpit door was kind of closed. So I grab the cockpit door, I open it, and it hits me like a ton of bricks. The smell was just awful. It was like a dead body was in there. And I was like, oh my God, Rob, what the hell, man? And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. That's not for you. I was leaving something for the morning crew. Please don't say anything. He turns beet red. He is so embarrassed. He just freaking ripped the nastiest fart I have ever smelled in my life. And I was like, my God, I'm covering my mouth. I said, Rob, did you freaking kill it before you ate it? What's wrong with you, man? And he's just like so embarrassed. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. That's not for you. I was leaving him a present for the morning. I was like, Rob, man, you need to go see a doctor. Come on, man. And we laughed so hard. He goes, promise me you won't say anything to the flight attendant. That's just you weren't supposed to ever know or smell that. I'm like, dude, that's just wrong. That's wrong. What are you doing, man? It's wrong. He's like, no, man, it's just for the morning crew. It's just, they're not going to be out here in a few hours, and I think it's going to still smell. I'm like, I just been eating a lot of beans lately. Like, so yeah, I'm like, okay, fine, dude, that's awful. And I never looked at him the same way ever again. It was bad. So yeah, that's some stinky shit right there. And that's all good-hearted and everything, but sometimes you're put in a situation where pilots are behaving badly, and it affects you. It affects your crew, it affects your passengers, and the safety of flight operations. And I hope that no one really has to go through that, but it's actually an absolute fact of life. Now, I had a situation, allegedly, that I'm more than happy to talk about. And it's a great story about years ago. So I was flying with a captain that I admire tremendously. I've flown with him probably, if we accumulate all the days and trips that we've done together, probably a good 6 months together. Really nice guy. We're going to call him Captain Jimmy because he reminds me of Jimmy Stewart. Tall, slender, relatively good-looking older guy, and really smart, very articulate, and just the kind of guy you want to hang out with and have a conversation with. So I'm hanging out with my Captain Jimmy, and his wife is actually our flight attendant, and usually is. They were doing what's called buddy bidding, where you both bid the same schedule, and once you have enough seniority, usually it works out. So Buddy bid with his wife all the time, so the three of us became very good friends. And he leans over to me on one of my trips and says, hey, Tony, I'm going to be heading to Dallas tonight instead of flying with you to Columbus because I have to do a PC in the morning. And back in the day, we had this things called proficiency checks. And once a year or once every so many months, a captain would have to go back to Dallas which is where our headquarters is at Legacy Airlines, and they would have to go into the simulator and do a check to make sure that they're still proficient in emergency drills and emergency procedures. So it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. And he's like, yeah, so I'm gonna travel to Dallas tonight instead of going to Columbus with you, and you're gonna have a reserve captain with you. And I said, okay. And he goes, he's a new captain. He's on reserve, and I flew with him years and years ago. And I'm not going to tell you anything about him because I don't want to have you come up with some kind of prejudices. But I'm just curious how it is flying with him because I've heard some things, and I respect your opinion. You're a pretty fair guy. Just curious. And I said, well, okay, Captain Jim, this guy better not be a total dick, because if he is, you're buying all the beers next week. That's all I gotta say. And he laughed. And he's like, okay, calm down. He's like, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. You're a smart guy. You'll figure it out. And I'm like, okay, I'll give you a fair assessment. And so we're sitting there at the gate, and he's seeing us off because his flight is later on in the evening, and we're leaving out. And just to paint the picture, it's a winter evening out of Chicago, flying Chicago to Columbus, relatively short flight. Over Columbus, there's a layer of icing from 4,000 feet to 8,000 feet of known icing. And so we knew we were going to have a little bit of wintry conditions and winter weather conditions on the approach and arrival. So we're standing there at the gate, and I hear a voice from a person behind us going, Jimmy, good. So I get to fly and sleep with your wife tonight, huh? Ha 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 ha. And we just turned around like, what the hell are you saying? Jimmy's wife turns around, looks at him, and like, oh God, she dealt with this guy before. And I'm like, who is this guy? Relatively short guy, silver hair, silver mustache, and the hat. Yes, folks, the trifecta. We have talked about the trifecta before. An FO once told me, if you have silver hair and a silver mustache and you wear the captain's hat, you're automatically kind of an asshole. And I was like, what? So yeah, it's called the trifecta. I was like, oh, thanks. I don't have a mustache, so there you go. Plus, I'm not a captain anymore, so there you go. There. Anyway, so this guy comes up, he says these things, and Jimmy just kind of smirks at him, like, okay, enough. What's going on? And I look at Jimmy and I go, I'm gonna go down to the airplane and pre-flight it. Have a good PC. It's already okay. This guy's kind of pissed me off, rubbed me the wrong way, and fine. So Jimmy's wife and I go down to the aircraft, and I do my pre-flight, do my walk around, I get back in, I get all the flight management system loaded up. I basically have everything ready to go. And when this new captain, reserve captain, gets in the cockpit, he goes, you're not one of these new hire pukes, are you? I mean, excuse me? He says, yeah, new hire puke, and these 300-hour wonders that freaking don't know what the hell they're doing and can't talk on the radio. I'm like, well, no, I've been here for quite a few years, and I have some couple thousand hours on this airplane at the time. That's what I had. And I'm like, no. And he goes, oh, okay, good. Let's just get there, okay? It's a short overnight. Let's just get there. I'm like, okay. So in the process of him, setting up his cockpit, he's given me his entire resume and telling me how he's God's gift to aviation, and he was in the Marines, and he was an A4 driver, blah 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 blah, and so I'm like, okay, Captain, thanks for that information. He goes, well, it's your leg. I'm like, well, actually, I flew 2 already today, so if you don't mind, I'd rather just be pilot monitoring, work the radios and whatnot. And he's like, no. I always want to see what I'm dealing with. You're flying. I'm like, oh, okay. I see how this is going to go. So we push off the gate, and no big deal. And we push off the gate, and there's another aircraft that's pushing in unison with us, kind of more shallow in the alley. And so they're in front of us, basically. And this individual that was on the radios was struggling a little bit. I mean, it was late at night, And he just comes unglued, my captain. He goes, gosh, damn it, this guy, he can't talk on the damn radio, and he's going to fumble it all up, and we're going to be following him because that flight's going to Cleveland, and we're going to Columbus, and they're in front of us now. And I'm like, whoa, Captain, please, calm down. This is not a big deal. It's late. They're tired. I've been flying all day. I can feel it too. Let's just get there. And he's like, well, I just can't stand people that can't talk on the radio. It's like, well, okay, all right. So, push off, go. We take off. The whole flight, he's telling me how he's been flying airplanes for so long, and how the way they train us in the schoolhouse to fly this airplane is all wrong, and all the speeds that they've trained us to fly and approach at are all wrong, and we're dragging airplanes in, and one of these days there's going to be a big smoking hole in the ground, and it's going to be a plane at the bottom of it from our regional airline, and it's just because these people don't know how to fly, and they can't talk on the radio. So I was like, what? I kind of just tuned this guy out a little bit. So when we're at cruise altitude, it's time for me to brief the approach and the arrival. So I'm briefing him on the intent that I have to fly this approach into Columbus, and I tell him, look, okay, we know about the weather, we know about the IFR condition with the icing, and once we get it's instrument flight rules, by the way, if you can't see the ground or the airport, you have to fly via instrument flight rules apply. So our IMC, instrument meteorological conditions, either way, depending on what you're talking about. So I brief him on, like, we're going to come in on this arrival, and when we get to the vector, the air traffic control is going to give us a heading. We're going to come out probably about 10 miles out before they turn us in. That's a relatively normal procedure in Columbus, and we're going to land on the north parallel runway. We'll pick up the airport visually below 3,000 feet, and we'll continue on the ILS. And if we have to do a go-around, I brief the go-around procedure and, everything, performance, landing performance. So he's like, yeah, okay. So we're still on with the arrival controller. And we're on this arrival, and we're still up above all the weather, the clouds, the freezing, precipitation. And they give us lower, and he says, well, can we get pause discretion on that? And I think, oh, okay. He's asking for pause discretion. That's a good idea. Why get into the icing condition if you don't have to? Let's just wait till we can get low enough to where we can just punch through it. And once we're beneath it, then, we can configure the airplane for landing and we're good to go. Why stick all these, the boards out, the flaps and the ailerons, we don't want to get icing on those surfaces. And so let's just wait until we can punch through it in clean configuration with the flaps up and the gear up. And then once we're through it, then we can drop all that stuff and land. That way we don't accumulate ice. And so I'm like, okay, he's kind of redeeming himself. But the whole time he's telling me how, too many people are letting air traffic control dictate how they fly the airplane, and you need to fly the airplane, and you need to tell air traffic control the way you want to fly it. And I'm like, okay, all right, okay. So finally I was like, okay, I got to start down. So I start down, and I'm on a downwind leg and an IMC at night with anti-icing on in icing conditions. And everything's going exactly as I briefed it. And he goes, just, get down. I was like, what? Get down. So just as he says that, he gets on the radio and he goes, can we get lower for regional 123? He's like, sure, regional 123 does maintain 3,000 feet. 3,000, okay. So he's like, get down. I'm like, what the hell? This guy talking about get down. So just as he says that, I do my best to slow the airplane down. When you have anti-icing on, it actually revs up the engines, the turbines a little bit higher RPM than normal. So it's a little bit more difficult to slow down and to descend at the same time. So, but we were still on profile. Everything was looking good. And he gets on the radio without saying a word and says, oh, well, we can take a base leg. We'll take a 180 heading. I'm like, what? What are you doing? And the tower controller goes, do you have the airport in sight? Oh, we're going to get it any minute. Just give us a base leg. And we weren't even 4 miles from the airport. We were less than halfway from when we normally would turn inbound. And something happened to me. I just, my attitude was pretty calm up till then, but I started to think, this guy, I can fly this airplane. I'll show you. I'm not going to let you dictate how I fly, but at the same time, you want me to turn? Fine, I'll freaking turn. Okay, which was my first mistake. So we turned the aircraft into a base leg, which is basically on a 90-degree angle to the final approach. And now I'm like, okay, I have no choice. I have to dirty up the configuration of the aircraft. So gear down, flaps, and speed brakes, and I'm doing my best to slow down and descend, and just as we're popping out of the clouds, normally our traffic control at that point at our distance from the runway would say, okay, do you have the runway in sight? Make a right turn, heading at this, and intercept the localizer flying inbound, and clear the visual or clear the ILS, whatever. And some other aircraft came on the frequency going, Cessna 123 coming in from the south at 2,500, and this young pilot is doing his best to navigate this heavy traffic airport, especially in the evening and winter. He's under the cloud deck coming in VFR, and the captain looks at me and goes, turn, you're going to overshoot final, just turn. I'm like, sir, we're on a heading. He's like, just turn the airplane, you don't tell it. ATC doesn't tell you what to do. You fly this airplane, you're in control of this airplane, not ATC. I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, dude, we're IFR, we're on a heading. And so just then, air traffic control, the guy stops talking, and air traffic control says, a regional 123, make an immediate right turn, intercept the localizer, do you have the airport in sight? And so, I make a nice sharp bank turn, and we were slow enough and had enough energy and made a nice sharp bank turn to get on final. We're all stabilized within 2,000 feet from the runway, and so everything was performed within the stable approach criteria, as we call it, but it wasn't pretty. And he's just nonstop. He's like, you don't wait for ATC to tell you got to fly this airplane, and you overshot, and you were going to land on the wrong runway. I've landed on the wrong runway a year before, and it's easy to do. And I did it once. 10 years ago, I landed on the wrong runway here, and you were going to do the same thing, and you can't. I was just, oh my God, this guy is like, he just needs to shut up. And so I continued the approach, and just about at 1,000 feet, everything was looking real nice. And we have what's called a pitch limit indicator on that aircraft on our primary instrument display. And what it says is if you pitch the aircraft up right now, beyond, I think it was 15 or 16 degrees at that point, that you can stall the airplane. But we weren't pitched anywhere near there. We were on a normal descent, pitched at about 2 degrees above the horizon, coming in nice and easy on speed, on approach. And he goes, get rid of that. I'm like, what? Why are you yelling at me? Get rid of that rake of death. You're not using the forward energy of the aircraft. You need to get rid of it. You're flying this airplane all wrong. And so he's just barking at me, and I'm like seeing red. I'm so pissed at this guy. He's doing everything wrong. He's saying everything wrong. So to appease him, I kind of bring up the power a little bit, get a little fast, and still able to salvage the approach and, landed in the touchdown zone. It was an okay landing. It wasn't great, but I wasn't going for great. I was just trying to get it in the touchdown zone because this guy's trying to get me to overspeed and become unstable, and I wouldn't let him. So as the mains touched down, the nose gear didn't even come down yet. And he goes, well, they can't all be good. I'm like, oh my God, this guy. At this point, I hear whistling in my ears, the steam's coming out. And he's just like nonstop. You got to use the forward energy, and I thought you were in a hurry when this is a short overnight, and you were going to use a brake maneuver and get out of the weather and get in the visual, and you're just dragging it in. You're doing what everybody else does. And he was just nonstop. This went on as we got to the gate, as we walked to the jet bridge, as we got on the hotel van, as we continued to the hotel. Finally, I got to my room. I shut the door. I almost slammed the door. I was so angry. And I called home, and I said to my wife, this guy is freaking driving me nuts. And I was just like yelling in the phone. And my wife stops me and goes, can he hear you? I'm like, I don't give a f if he can hear me or not. This asshole. And she's like, wait a minute, hold on. You're getting all worked up. You don't want to do that. Do you have to fly with them again? And I said, well, tomorrow I have one leg back to Chicago in the morning. She's like, well, you're an adult. You're mature. You're better than this. Just show up, do your job. Talk only about the checklist and your job, and then you probably will never have to fly with them again. I said, yeah, you're right, but I'm just angry because he put me in a situation where I was flying the airplane the way he wanted it, which was not right, and I should have stopped it. I should have stopped it earlier. I should have told him, no, I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of things I could have done, and I kind of let it get way beyond where my comfort zone was. She's like, well, just show up, do your job. So the next morning I show up to have hand time, and he looks at me and he goes, oh, Tony, you're here. Like, yeah, why wouldn't I be? He goes, well, I was kind of hard on you last night, and, I don't want you to think I was yelling at you. Just, sometimes my mouth gets going, and, I just keep going, and I'm just trying to teach you, and you're just using you weren't using the forward energy of the aircraft, and, but that's, I'm like, you know what? I just put my hands up, and I said, stop. I said, look, I'm a professional. We got a job to do. Let's just go fly the airplane. When we get to Chicago, I never have to see you again, and that's fine. He shut up. He didn't say a word to me, and he was an angel the whole way. He didn't say a thing. Got to Chicago, ran the checklist, packed up my shit, walked off the plane, and didn't say a word. And the following week, I'm in the crew room, and I'm picking up paperwork and signing in for my trip, and I can hear Jimmy come up behind me, and he says, Tony, my wife can hear everything that is being said in the cockpit when she's in the jump seat, and she heard everything last night, or last week, and she told me about it. I was like, Jimmy, I don't like you very much right now. You could have warned me a little bit better, but I don't know if that would have even done anything. He's like, dude, he goes, don't worry about it, man. I'm gonna hook you up, and dinner, drinks on me all week. And he goes, why didn't you report him? And I said, because he pushed me into a hazardous attitude. I should have immediately said, no, that's not right. I'm not going to do that. Or I could have got on the radio and said, nope, we don't want to turn. We want to continue, something. There's so many things I could have done that would have prevented him pushing me to do something that was basically hot dogging the airplane in, and it just, what irks me the most is not the fact that he is who he is and did what he did, but the fact that he pushed me into a situation that I didn't feel comfortable with. And, the learning point in the whole story was that I learned that I'm never going to let somebody push me into a situation that is not right, that is not safe. It's not that it was never really unsafe. It's just that it was like hot dogging it, just like making steep bit turns and, leveling off the airplane steeply. I mean, you have people in the back, and, you're in charge of making the ride as smooth as possible. And, having a little extra speed, there's nothing wrong with that if the conditions, dictate. And we were never really unstable. We were always within the stable criteria. So it wasn't like, I should have done a go around or anything like that. But it was not in my zone of comfort, the way I like to fly, the way I like to operate. So I learned a lesson, and I knew that if I, made it a complaint, that really I was going to be in trouble too, or at least talk to about it. And, so what's the lesson? The lesson is, don't let someone, regardless of rank and file, push you in a situation is wrong or unsafe. The best thing to do is to kind of think about, well, if this happens to me, how am I going to react? We always have the power of the radio. As a first officer, you're not in command. But if a safety violation is happening or potentially could happen, you're still responsible. And if you agree to it and you continue into an unsafe or even verse a violation of some kind, an FAA violation, you're just as guilty if you go along with it, even if you disagree. Well, I disagree with what you're doing, but you still continued and you didn't do anything to interrupt it. Well, you're still guilty. So you got to figure out what you're going to do. And if you talk about things like this and you think about it ahead of time, when the situation presents itself, you'll be better prepared. And I wasn't prepared. And after that event happened, I had a long conversation with myself about what I would do in the future if it happened again. So as an aviator, we always have to be prepared for unusual, unexpected events. And having a pilot, captain or not, push you into a situation where you know it's not right or you don't feel comfortable with, the most popular words that I used to instill in my first officers was, if you feel uncomfortable with anything, all you have to say is, Captain, I don't feel comfortable with this. And trust me, I will listen. So that's it for this show. We didn't even get to half of the topics that I wanted to discuss, but hey, that just means more information for the future. Well, that's going to do it for episode 11 of Squawk Ident. I'd like to take this opportunity and thank you, the listener, for listening in and subscribing. I really would appreciate feedback, and there are many ways that you can do that. The first thing I do is encourage you to visit www.aviatortony.com. That's Alpha Victor 8 Romeo Tango Oscar November Yankee.com. From there, you can contribute to the podcast. You can send us feedback through the Contact Us portal. You can also listen to content and visit the pilot shop. More designs coming soon on the pilot shop, so stay tuned for that. Also, you can listen to us on Anchor.fm or the Anchor app on your smartphone or device. Facebook users, Squawk Ident is a great way to stay in touch and see content like videos and photos from the flight line and even from future shows. Instagram, you can find us at Squawk Ident Podcast for the latest photos and flight line news. On Twitter, you can find us at Aviator Tony and Squawk Ident Podcast as well. So again, thank you for listening. And on future episodes, we'll be discussing more bad behavior. That seems to be a common response from the viewers, that they like to hear the stories about things that are going on in the flight deck. And that's why the disclaimer is at the beginning of the show. So stay tuned, and episode 12 is coming soon. I would like to take this time to thank all of you for listening to this Grateful Aviator. Keep the dirty side down, be safe, and take care of each other.